And this is another one that was really fighting for the position of pick of the week because this one really did impress me, and I wasn't expecting that at first because of the name of the game. I thought it was going to be more of a war style type game, which I'm not usually super interested in for my own personal tastes. But I would say that despite its name, this one is not really a war game, it's more of an area control game. Because in this game, players are trying to be the first to earn 10 points by controlling different regions on the map. Something that's interesting here is that you're trying to control the different castles at each of the individual regions. Whenever you do that, you're going to be gaining the points associated with that region, which are labeled on the regions. And when you gain points, you're just going to be moving up on the track. But something that is important to note here is that if you ever lose possession of that castle, you actually lose those victory points and you're going to be going back down on the track. So there is a bit of a tug and war going on here. But each of the players do start the game with one of their troops on the board, and each player is also going to start the game with 3 cards dealt to them. And these cards are super important because they are the main mechanism that drives the game forward, and on a player's turn they're going to be choosing one of the 3 cards from their hand and either playing it or choosing to reserve it. Whenever you reserve a card, you're just going to be putting it face down in front of you, and you can normally only have 1 card reserved at a time, but there are some ways to break that rule, but I will come back to what exactly that does in a moment. So when a player decides to play a card, they're going to be gaining the amount of action points listed at the top of that card, and then each of the other players has to perform the actions that are outlined within their color on that card, but you will be ignoring any of the actions associated with the color of the active player. And one extra added advantage about being the active player is that you also get to decide the player order for that turn. So you can choose whether you want to go first, second, or third, and where exactly you want the other players in relation to that. But of course, there's all sorts of actions that players can perform. They can recruit more troops into their supply or deploy some of the troops from their supply onto the different areas of the board. They can also attack and fortify different regions on the board. And one thing that I think is really elegant about this game is that just being in a region doesn't give you control of that region. You first have to fortify it by controlling the castle that is in that region. And whenever you do that, you're going to be stacking a number of tokens onto this circle here within the region, indicating that you currently have control over it, and fortifying it more just means that you are stacking more tokens on top of that castle icon. And I think the recruit, deploy, and move actions are all pretty self-explanatory here, so I'm not going to go into too much detail onto those, but I do want to explain both the attack action and also a special action known as the besiege action. And these are very different, but they are both very important ways for you to gain control in the different regions on the board. Attack actions can happen between any 2 colors of tokens located on the same region, as long as those tokens are not part of the fortified tokens that you have stacked on top of the castle in that region. And although it doesn't include those tokens by default, the person that does have the tokens there can choose to remove those tokens from the fortification and put them into the region to add more defense into that area. Combat in this game is resolved using dice rolling, but the way that you get more dice into your pool is by having more tokens in that region, or by spending more of your action points on that attack action, because if you are the main player and you're spending your action points in order to perform an attack, you can only perform 1 attack on your turn, but you can dedicate as many of your available action points to that attack, with each action point allowing you to add 1 more die into your roll. And although attacking and destroying other players is super important and also a lot of fun, like I said, it's not the way that you're actually going to be gaining victory points. In order to gain victory points in this game, you have to control that region, which means that if the opponent has a stack of tokens on that region already, you're going to have to try and take power over that castle, not by attacking it, but by besieging it. And this actually works quite a bit different from an attack, because all you're trying to do is get as many of your tokens into that region as possible. And then once you have more tokens than the tokens that are on top of the castle in that region, you can then perform the besiege action in order to put your tokens on top of the player's tokens that already owns the castle. And if you're like me, you're probably expecting that the tokens there would have been removed, but that is not the case. And I think this is a really ingenious design decision, because the way that this works is that at the end of every turn, 1 of those tokens from each player is going to be removed. And I think this is a really ingenious design decision that really rounds out the game, because my initial concern with this game was that the points would just be traded back and forth, and there'd be a high chance of a stalemate as you play this game. But because you can continue to maintain those points even after you've been besieged for a period of time, depending on how many tokens you put there, that really prevents the case of points just being traded back and forth. And it's not only about getting the points, but trying to make sure that you can secure them as long as possible, just long enough to get you those 10 points, which will trigger the end of the game and you as the winner. So that pretty much explains everything when it comes to playing a card, but let's jump back to reserving a card and what exactly that does, because when you do reserve a card and put it down, face down in front of you, when you do get into a battle, you can flip that reserved card over, and then all you care about is the associated action points. Whatever that number is, you're going to be adding that amount to your power on your side of the battle, which means that you get to roll that many more additional dice. This is a really nice ace up your sleeve if you really want to secure a battle and just tip the favor towards you. But whether a player chooses to play a card or reserve a card on their turn, they will be drawing one more card into their hand, so that all players always have 3 cards at the end of their turns. And the game ends either once a player reaches 10 victory points or once that deck of cards completely runs out, and then the player with the most victory points at that point wins the game. And if this one sounds interesting to you, you can check it out. I have it linked in the description below.